So, Craig, after nearly 25 years in the Navy, what core principles or lessons have you carried with you, and how do they translate into your work today?
Okay, so let's I guess just to take a step back, I'll talk a little bit about what I did in the Navy and kind of how I got there. So I grew up in Hobart in Tasmania, one of three boys, uh, and for reasons that are well and truly lost in the dark past, I decided when I was in grade three that I wanted to join the Navy. So what are you in grade three? Kind of 8 years old. So I'm like, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And I didn't have any family history in it, and I just decided I wanted to do that. I tried to join when I was 15, and the recruiting guy goes, "Well, you could, but you could in those days, but maybe go and finish your year 12 and stuff, and you can join as an officer." And I went, "Oh, okay." I didn't even know what that was, I guess. So, yeah, 20. That was about 1984. I joined. So, yep, left, finished year 12, and joined the Navy, not really having any idea what I was getting myself in for. I joined up. I think there were seven of us from Tasmania joined, but essentially the structure was to go and do a degree with the Navy, and then officer training as you go through, and then be what they called an executive branch guy. So one of the guys who drives ships.
Yeah.
So that's where I was. So I went and did that. I went and did an arts degree. I was going to do science, but then when I got to the start of it, I'm like, I can do the same job, but do an arts degree, and I think I'll enjoy that more, which was probably a good decision.
Hmm.
Um, so then went through the training pathway, I guess, and drove ships, and then specialised and wound up operating aircraft, so helicopters and those sorts of things. So I guess that's what I did. So I guess your question was, what core traits was it? What sort of
Yeah, core principles or
I
lessons, yeah.
yeah, I guess core principles kind of came out. You know, it starts pretty young, and it's about being honest, certainly, um, and doing your best, being a genuine person, and trying to always do your best at whatever it is that you task that you're given, and looking after your friends. I guess that's the core thing is you're a part of a group of people that join the Navy at the same time. I was 17 years old when I joined, and you quickly make friends because you're in that particular environment. And so the core principles, I guess, um, and that I still carry through to this day are, I guess, probably a key one really in all its forms is honesty.
Hmm.
That doesn't always seem to stand me in such good stead because sometimes I can tend to be, you probably have to speak to my family, maybe a little blunt
Hmm.
sometimes, but that's because I just sometimes I'm almost painfully, excruciatingly honest
Yeah.
about things. So I guess that's what's carried me through. And then I try to apply that. Or apply that in the other work that I've done since I've not been full time as well. So whether that's giving someone advice as a lawyer, or doing some of the other work I've done as a Navy reservist.
Hmm. Yeah. And with the sort of bluntness that you've learnt from the Navy, um, are there any sort of things that you've taken from the Navy that you might find challenging to sort of turn those off around your family and personal life that, you wish that you could do better?
Um, you know, I guess I guess I'd have to ask someone else about that. Certainly, I think they're probably. I would be surprised if there weren't, if there wasn't something.
Mm.
I'm not without that much insight, self insight, but it's really, I guess, because I joined relatively young, and it was such a big part of my life. And in fact, even today, with my friends and yeah, I'm going to say networks, but really it's my friends and my good friends. They're all from a similar background, so it's kind of ingrained in me. It's one of those things, probably like any role, but specifically one where you do a lot of things with a group of people. You're kind of in it for life, and it actually becomes part of you, and you become part of it. And that might sound to some people possibly negative, but in fact, I see it as a really positive thing.
Yeah.
So last week, for example, I came up to Sydney and had dinner with a couple of friends, and we joined the Navy together 41 and a bit years ago, and I'm going down to a sporting event the weekend after next in Melbourne, and I'm staying with guys I've known for 40 years, and it's those lifelong friendships, I guess. That's a big part of it. Just to jump back to your question, things I would change. I can say when I used to come home, if I'd been away, I would swear a lot, a lot.
Well,
And
Taylor, as they say.
yeah, and I think that was because of that environment. Certainly back in those days, particularly, it was an all-male environment initially. And I wouldn't say it was so much macho, not macho at all, but really it's every second word, mate, every second word. And so I'd come home and I'd just have to go, whoa, and not so much around my family, but just like in normal conversation. I'd have to just throttle it back because what might have been normal when there's a couple of hundred people out on a ship at sea or deployed for 6 months is not really normal, at the local shop. So that's probably not terribly exciting, but that's probably something.
Yeah. And then going back to the back to the friendships that you've made in the Navy.
Yeah.
Do you think part of those strong connections that you've made with those, people that you've worked with in the Navy comes from the mutual struggle that you've gone through, or is there something else that might have?
No, look, I think it's shared experience. You've had an experience together when you were very young, and that you've all found challenging, but found challenging in different ways. I guess the two fellas I caught up with last week probably as good as an example as any. I didn't actually, once I'd finished uni, I worked with one of them for about a year, many, many years later, but we didn't ever actually work together. We didn't ever work together on the same ship or in the same, shore establishment, but we always were friends, and we kind of tracked each other's careers, and we, always in touch. And we've seen our kids grow up. We've been through, divorces together to some degree, challenges with children, challenges with life, challenges with health, all the things that anyone who's 58, which is what I am, you're going to run into a few things by the time you get to my age. So, yeah, I guess it's just that ongoing contact and shared experience, but it is based in that initial shared experience. And I think that's something really important. It's, as I said, though, it's all I know. So I don't know what it's like for people from other backgrounds.
Yeah, and in the Navy, so you were responsible for sort of selecting the future leaders of the Navy. Were there any sort of key traits or characteristics that you were looking out for? And
Okay, yes, sorry, go on.
And how do these traits manifest in everyday life, say outside of the military, as solicitor, how would these traits and characteristics be applied to that sort of work as well?
Okay, so for the last couple of years, I did a little bit of work as on the selection boards for people joining the Navy as officers. So I guess the traits that you're looking for really is again honesty, willingness to learn, being able to engage with people, and we recently for the last few years they conduct interviews via this method, via Zoom or an equivalent. And initially I was like, oh man, how can you see what someone's like when you're looking at a screen? But you're asking a lot of questions, and really you want them to talk, because you're looking for someone who has, you're not going to find a great leader as a 17 or an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old, but you're looking for someone who is starting to show they have the capacity to learn to be a leader. So they're interested in those things. they can engage, they look you in the eye when they're speaking to you on the screen, so to speak, when they're interacting with the other people that are in going through the process. They're able to interact and not be overbearing, but speak up when they need to, and make sure that they're heard. You don't necessarily want someone who, well, in fact, you don't really want someone, I guess, who's quiet as a mouse and frightened, but nor do you want some kind of brash, loudmouth bully either. So you kind of want someone who's in the middle, and they're able to be trained and they can learn. So I guess a little bit of self-confidence is helpful, but not that self-confidence that, sometimes I find intimidating in people your age, Ethan. And you go, oh, man, I couldn't imagine, walking up and shaking someone's hand, getting in their face, g'day, how are you? I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
So you're kind of looking for someone who can learn and understanding where their values are. So, as I said, you're honest people. Can they get on with other people? Are they someone that is probably going to be able to learn to be someone who's able to be listened to, who can lead and those sort of things. So I guess that's some of those things.
Yeah. And another point I want to raise on that sort of overconfidence thing, obviously confidence is a important trait, but do you reckon that perhaps you need a good mix of confidence and humility? Is that the sort of way you go about it, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in leadership, they talk about humble leadership, which might be something you've heard of before. And so that's being able to engage and listen to other people, listen to the people that you're leading or that you're working with, or if you are being led, because a good leader should be able to be led as well. Having that humility, as you say, which is a good word, to listen to other people and listen to their opinions and make them feel heard and account for their opinions in your decision making. So I think that's really important as well. So yeah, humble leadership. That doesn't mean, again, that you're kind of a quiet, shy, retiring type, but it means that you listen, and that you listen actively, and that people know that they're being heard. And if people feel as though they're being listened to and they're being valued, then, generally, if your ability then is to take their opinion, put it in as a factor into whatever decision you're making, and that's going to be the same in business, the same in the military, the same in any organisation, then everyone's going to feel like they're coming along for the journey and like they're part of something. I think that's really, really important. And I've been lucky to work with people who have been very, very good at that, and from time to time worked with or seen people who perhaps aren't so good at that. So I guess that's worth mentioning. You can learn a great deal from people who maybe aren't the leader that you might want them to be if they're your leader. Certainly, you've obviously got to manage yourself in those circumstances, but you can also learn from them, even if that's as simple as, well, I don't want to be like that person. But then take that one step further. But why don't you want to be like that person? Is that because they're just irritating, or they're a bully, or they're not listening to me, or they're taking all the credit for themselves? Or, what is it? What is it about that individual that you actually don't like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I'm sure that in the Navy you've been through a lot of high pressure situations where there's tough calls to make and the stakes are high. Yeah, what's your sort of process to dealing with those? Is there anything in particular that you do to minimize risk and get the best result?
Well, I guess I'll talk about two things there. One is in the military, the Navy context, is that, look, yeah, you're engaged in activities that are, can be perceived as risky, but the risk is always managed. So let's just say you're air crew in a helicopter and you're flying on and off a ship in the middle of the night. It's got a single spot on the flight deck. The ship that might look big alongside the wharf doesn't look very big when it's in the middle of the ocean. You're trying to find the ship to get back. The weather might be bad. You're there with your pilot who's got to get you on the deck, and you're working as a team. So those things, on the face of it, are risky, but they're managed by training and process and working as a team. And I've got to say, I very rarely felt. I probably felt nervous, but a heightened state of nervousness, but not in a negative sense. So I didn't really go over that curve. Now I'll contrast that with the circumstances I encountered, in the private sector after I left the Navy, where I was in a business and we had a dispute amongst the directors. I was one of the directors, and I actually found that way more stressful than anything I'd ever done in the Navy. And and there were times in the military, arguably, where you're probably only very not too far away from having some accident, or and being injured or perhaps killed. I didn't find that was nothing compared to the stress that I found working in the private sector, when someone perhaps is trying to undermine you or your business and damage your income, your family's income, the income of your staff, those sort of things. I actually personally found that a lot more stressful. I think that's because I took some of those values that I'd had about honesty and about looking after everyone, looking after people. I then translated that through to where I was working. And I learned a great deal about myself through that process, and a great deal of, that sometimes you can, in fact, spend too much time worrying about perhaps other people. You maybe worry a bit more about yourself, and have a bit more faith that people can look after themselves to some degree. So
Yeah, and yeah, do you think part of that sort of risk and yeah, those high stake decisions in your current career as a solicitor, do you reckon that's because it has more of an impact on people's lives? And can you tell me a bit more about what exactly you do as a solicitor in the day-to-day life?
yeah, well, I think you're right. So at the moment and these days, I really just practice in one area of law, which is migration law. So that's about people coming to Australia to live here permanently or to come here to work. Australian migration system is very, very complex, and you want to do your best for your client, in terms of how they want to come out here. So that might be an employer wanting workers to come out, or that might be someone who's married someone from overseas, they want to get them out. There's a whole bunch of circumstances there. So that stuff is very personal, and you can take that on. I guess so that does have a direct impact on people. Some of the work I did earlier when I first started, of the first few years, a lot of transactional stuff. So numbers, money, property, commercial issues, businesses. I also spent a little bit of time in working for an organisation called the Prisoners Legal Service in New South Wales, and they look after people who are in jail. So solicitors from our firm would go and visit jails every week or 2 weeks and see people from all walks of life who'd found themselves on the wrong side of the law, and they'd be asking for your advice as well. So it does get you are very close to people and their feelings and what they're doing, and it can be anything from a financial issue, or a where do I live issue, what country can I live in issue, to a deprivation of liberty issue. Someone's locked up and perhaps they shouldn't be, or they think they shouldn't be, and they want some advice on how they can navigate to the next step. So yeah, I guess that can be stressful, and I guess it's the same for many other roles out there. Maybe I guess doctors, those sort of people, they're dealing with that sort of stuff every day of the week, aren't they? So.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've been through a lot of experiences. So from your career to your personal life, looking back on it, what have you learned about fatherhood, and are there conversations that you wish you had with your sons that it's now too late to do so?
Yeah, look, I think you generally I'd say, and it's certainly not just me. I think all fathers are generally doing, well, hopefully they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have at the time. And I think over time, just like playing sport, you practice things and you get better at them, or you get better at it, is what I'd say. And so, where do you get those tools from when you start? Well, it's probably what you've seen other people do. Probably it's what you've seen your own father do if you've had a good relationship, with your own dad. And that's, I guess that's where I came from. I, have huge respect for my father, and the way that he interacted with me when I was young. And so, um, I suppose you start out replicating that to some degree because you don't really know anything else. And then as you go, you see other things, you learn, and you have a bit, you get more experience. And I'm in a very strange situation whereby I've got 6 children, 2 from my first marriage who are now about 30 years old, and then another 4 from my second marriage. But the second 4 were kind of in 2 lots of 2. So there's 2 kids, then a gap. Then I had my next 2 kids who are, 17 and 19, nearly 18 and 19. And then I've got another 2, lo and behold, who are 6 and 9. So I've kind of got 3 lots of 2.
Mm.
And man, I think I'm a better father for the last 2 than I was for the first 2.
Mm.
I don't think that's because I was particularly negligent for the first 2. It's just that I know, man, I've had a lot of practice here.
Mm.
I know more than I did, and I know what I feel as though I know what works a little bit better. I don't know it all.
Mm.
Certainly, my wife Emma, between the 2 of us, we recognise we're both trying to figure it out and constantly, test and adjust things as we go. And we've made mistakes, and we'll continue to make mistakes, I guess. But you just do what you can.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so one of your children is currently facing legal challenges. Can you tell me a bit about that story, how he got to that point where he is, and yeah, just how you are navigating that situation with the rest of the family, and
Yeah,
yeah, what it's taught you about yourself and about life.
yeah. So he's my second son. He he lived with me for a year, I think. A year. We separated when he was very young, so he hadn't started school. And then he came and lived with Emma and I for a year when he was at high school, and then went back to his mum and her husband. And he had some some learning issues, mental health issues. I'm not sure of the category, ADHD and ADD as a young fella that was diagnosed and being treated, and he didn't finish school, didn't really complete year 10, and then kind of I was living interstate, so I was many miles away from him, thousands of kilometres. He kind of started hanging out with people, using drugs, smoking dope, I guess, the usual stuff. And that whole scene it's actually, it's a pretty unsavoury crowd generally. It doesn't always attract great people. And there's probably an argument that, my bloke was no different from any of them. I'm certainly not suggesting he was anyway, some kind of victim here.
Mm.
And, he bounced around and got he got in trouble with the law. So, minor drug offences, I guess. And then there was some property damage stuff. And so in and out of the local court system. I was talking to him throughout all this. I guess that's one of the lessons that I now take is that, I remember when it first kind of started and I could see that things were going wrong. I spoke to him about it. But I was pretty naive and I thought that perhaps, just by my sheer willpower, I could control how he was going to do things and what he was going to do. And I was completely wrong, absolutely wrong. And in hindsight, what could I have done better? I'm not sure that I could have had any better conversations with him, but, you'd have to ask him. I could have not raised my voice so much. I could have not tried to not thought that I could browbeat him in to, taking a position or going a particular pathway. Because I realised that now that all those things, I was really just pushing him away, and I wasn't. It wasn't positive, but I didn't know what to do, and I thought that I'll do this. So anyway, so look, that went on. So he's been, in trouble with the courts, in and around, and it's all generally been drug related, and and he ended up getting sentenced for a few things and going to jail for a number of, a couple of different times, maybe 6 months here, 8 months there, sort of thing. I went up and got him just over a year ago, in fact, about 15 months ago, picked him up from jail, took Ollie up, who's your age, my son, and up in Queensland, and got him out and helped him. He stayed with us, and we, helped him sort out his car and kind of sort of get his life back on track, had somewhere to live, had his car. He's always been quite capable of hard-working guy, working on building sites and things. And then lo and behold, 6 weeks later, he's in touch with me again, and, he's back in jail. So he'll be getting sentenced in a few weeks. He tells me that it's likely to be a substantial length of time, perhaps 6 years, 6 to 9 years, but, potentially. So very serious charges, drug-related charges. So I guess we'll just wait and see. So that's his story. So I keep in touch with him regularly, and I guess I've learned over the years, what's the best thing I can do? I just think the best thing I can do is just to be there, be available. It's hard for him to it's hard to maintain contact with someone who's locked up in a state, but you can. In fact, you can have video conferences and those sort of things, video calls, phone calls. So I guess that's where I'm at, right now, is just trying to keep my door open and trying to be a constant in his life, which has seen a lot of turmoil, and he's had a lot of challenges. So how do I deal with that, I guess, is another part of the question. People often ask me, well, initially I probably didn't deal with it very well. I felt ashamed because I'd never had any exposure to these things, really. I'd been a lawyer, but I hadn't really contemplated having a family member, on the inside. And I felt guilty. What could I have done? How could I have stopped this? I felt, embarrassed to tell people. And I guess over time I've slowly moved through a lot of those things. There's still a bit of that right across the board, I think, but he's got a particular set of challenges in his life. Some of them, and he's made decisions that make those things harder to deal with. And I'm more reconciled with him. He's now an adult, with him and how he's choosing to lead his life. I'm fortunate in that he doesn't yell and scream and carry on about how he's hard done by. He kind of goes, well, you know what, they got me, if you like, or they got me this time, and I guess this is what it's going to look like. And he acknowledges also that he's wasting his life doing this. So it's really hard, mate. It's really hard to see someone who I think of, my memories of him range from what he looks like right now to, the little kid, the 2-year-old who used to run around the place. And he's no different to me. Like he's the same person. He's just grown into a man. So I'm going to say it's not easy. I've got other children, and I want him to be the best version of himself that he can be. And I now understand that might not be what I think it might look like. And rather strangely, and I think it's counterintuitive, is that I'm also actually very proud of him in a way. I have other children who are reaching and have reached, continue to reach levels of, professional or I guess academic success. They're only young. And I am proud of those, but I'm also proud of this guy because he's facing challenges that are unique to him. they've taken him to a place, in terms of being in jail, incarcerated, that very, very few people, thankfully, experience. And from what I understand and what I see, how he's conducting himself reasonably in that environment. It's a tough place, mate. I've spent enough time in prisons to know that it's tough. And he's surviving, and he has friendships, human relationships with other inmates, with the staff, because that's what his life looks like at the moment. Now, it'll change, because one day it won't look like that. The tricky is that, you asked me right at the start of this about traits that I wish that, maybe I hadn't carried forward from the Navy. And I think inmates need to, guard against some of the traits that they might carry forward when they come back out. And some of those traits aren't exactly what you might think. They aren't that they're a super crim. They might be things as simple as having the confidence to operate in the society that you and I are part of, understanding human relationships in a way that's not confrontational, being able to break out of that level of institutionalization that is necessary for, I guess, prisons to run. So, yeah, he's got some challenges ahead, and I'll be there. But being there doesn't mean, he has to live in my house. And I often think, what could I have done differently? Mate, if he'd been handcuffed to me from the age of 15, I think we would have killed each other in about the first 24 hours. So I don't think that was the solution either. So, we all make our own decisions and we all get on. But it's just being there to be able to provide some support that he needs.
Yeah. I mean,
did that answer the question?
Yeah. No, that was really good. Yeah, and do you think there's an element of it where you might try to control it, or, you know, do everything on your end, but it's really up to him? Like,
Oh yeah, absolutely, mate. It's you can do your best to provide an environment. Even as a father, I guess you can do your best to provide your child with an environment, given the circumstances that you have at the time. So you might be, there's a whole bunch of things, isn't there, about how people who have children, living their lives. But they're, that child is going to be a product, I guess, a combination of being a product of that system that they've grown up in, that be their mum and dad or their parents or whoever, or their family. And then, obviously they do make decisions for themselves. And this guy, he's entirely capable of making decisions for himself. And he's learning as he gets older that it's sometimes useful to ask people for advice.
hmm.
And I think that's a really, really great thing.
Yeah.
So I don't. So do I? I guess and I guess to bring it back to me, do I feel responsible? I guess I have a degree of responsibility, but I don't have any degree of control. And I think that's I'm comfortable with that. That's life. That's what life's about, right? So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then if you could, you know, go back to, say, when you were 20, in your 20s, or, when your sons were in their 20s, or, anything like that, and just have a conversation with them, what do you think the main topics that you would bring up would be?
Well, I guess I'll talk about myself rather than my children, I guess. And what conversation would I have with myself? And again, I'll go back. I was reflecting with these guys I was at a dinner with last week, and I would tell myself to worry less. I would tell myself to be less self-conscious. and be more of who you are than who you think you should be. I guess that that sounds like something you'd get off TikTok or Instagram, an Instagram reel. But I mean that's I genuinely mean that. Have have a bit of have self confidence. That doesn't mean overconfidence. That doesn't mean that brashness that we were touching on before. I could say back yourself, but that sounds like I'm going to jump off this bridge or a 100-meter drop into water. I'm going to back myself. I'm going to land okay. Well, I'm not sure. Not really. It's not that kind of backing yourself. It's not blind optimism.
Mm.
But I think it's just I regret. I wish that I'd had a bit more confidence as a young bloke, and I think that would have made. I may have made some better decisions along the way, but I don't have a. I'm not sitting here racking, stacked with a regret. I've got to
Yeah.
be brutally honest. But that's probably it. I kind of accept that you live your life as you live your life. Generally, people are doing the best they can with whatever they have, intellectual, social, financial, faith, spiritual, whatever it is. People just are generally doing what they can as they travel through life. But yeah, I think a degree of confidence, mate. I was, I just didn't have a lot of confidence in things like relationships, certainly with girls, very dorky, underconfident kid with bad skin, um, and it was, and that's a big part of it when you're, or big part of it for me when I was a young guy. I spent my whole years terrified of the whole thing, and then it was only many years later that I realised that just what were you worrying about, mate? Just calm yourself. So
Mm.
I'd probably tell people to calm down. In fact, I was, and you'll kind of find your way. People will find their way. Some people need more time than others, so people find their way, and just keep learning as you go. I think there was probably a time, maybe in my late 20s, I couldn't put a finger on it. I'm sure at some point I was pretty sure I had it all sorted out, and of course I was completely wrong. And I wouldn't. And if someone said, "Well, Craig, you've been around a bit now. You're an old bloke. What you'd have nothing else to learn," I would go, "Mate, I haven't even started." So that's the truth. And I don't say that that's not like bad news, but be confident that whatever point you are in your life, as long as you're doing the best, you're being honest with yourself, you're being honest with other people, and kind of, and if you want to keep driving forward to do different things, keep driving forward, and you kind of, it dawns on you as well as you get older. I kind of look back and I'd look up at all these people that might have been, maybe in the military, they were senior officers, or they were, experienced people. And I always thought, I don't know, I guess we see people in the press now, we think, oh man, wow, that person's so smart. How could they do that? Who is that person? Obviously, there are people with far greater intellect than you or I will ever have or ever develop. But people are just people, and people are just doing the best they can. And I guess whether you're the prime minister, or you're a world leader, or you're the guy running your local business, or it just doesn't really matter. People are just doing the best with the tools they have. Some people have more tools within themselves and external to themselves, advisors and people that they can have supporting them as they lead businesses or they lead organizations. But they're still just people. And so when you go to talk to those people, and you meet them, just kind of remember that. You don't, you see King Charles. I mean, the guy's a king, right? But he's just a person. And I'm sure that in his day, I would hope that in his day, he gets probably more pleasure out of sharing a joke with someone that he meets and having a laugh than I don't know, whatever the most kingly thing is that he can do.
Mm.
I don't know, maybe someone butters his toast or puts a crown on his head or whatever it is. So, but we're all just people, and everyone's trying to do their best. I guess that's probably about all I know.
Mm. No, that was a really good answer. Yeah, that was amazing. Um, yeah. So during your extensive period in the Navy, I imagine you've experienced yeah moments of loss, whether it was losing a fellow service, member, or dealing with difficult way of, say, a mission or a challenge. Yeah, how do you process this, and yeah, how do you think men today can build the emotional resilience to handle situations like this?
Yeah, I guess in in my time full time serving in the Navy, um, I deployed to a couple of operational areas, but I certainly wasn't involved directly in any fighting. Though a number of people that I've worked with over the years have been killed as a result of accidents,
Mm,
um, and so you know people that I've had lunch with have died that afternoon.
mm,
Uh, People that I've shared meals with have died the following day. And how do you reconcile those things? How do you become resilient? I think I think it's is it resilience? I guess if resilience is being able to to get back up and keep going, I suppose that's one thing. I suppose you look at those circumstances and you think, well, that's, I mean, none of us are here forever. Um, and we're all working to minimize those risks. But in that particular context, those were risks that, we were aware of. It's probably more challenging for people who have those close to them, pass away with illness and those sorts of things. And how do men become resilient to that? I think men can become more resilient by being able to talk about it with other people. And I'm not necessarily signed up to you can only talk to other men about it. I'm not sure that's terribly helpful at all. Maybe women, maybe your partner, maybe a female friend, a male friend. I think it's the ability to put into words how you're feeling and work your way through whatever it is that you're feeling to get to a place where you can sit with that. You're not going to be comfortable with it. I don't think anyone would be, and I'm sure, Ethan, you've had people that have passed away that you may know, and I certainly have, and I think of them more often than I would have thought about them
mm,
if you'd asked me 30 years ago, and I don't think I actually don't find that unhealthy. I find that kind of helpful. A good friend of mine passed away from a reasonably short illness, maybe 5 years ago, and I think of him quite often. But I don't think about him with a terrible sadness. I think of him about what he was like, how he was, his sense of humour, how he was funny, how he was with people. And so I find, and that's something that I'm able to talk to some people about, mutual friends. So I think being able to talk about it, I'll use I guess a personal example. So resilience. What seems like a million years ago now, my first marriage was breaking down, and I didn't understand at the time why it was happening. So, which is probably on reflection is probably half the problem, but I didn't understand it right, and I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. I was ashamed. I felt like a loser. I thought, man, what's going on? Like, I don't get it. And I was, bottling it all up. At the same time, I was trying to do some, going to get through some work stuff. And I remember when I told someone about it, someone that I trusted with that information. And when I say trusted, I trusted they wouldn't make fun of me. I trusted they'd listen. I really remember it, mate. It was like someone literally took a weight off my shoulders.
mm,
It was like, man, I kind of, it just felt like such a relief that it was unbottled. And so I think that's a key thing. So if you're having challenges in your life, find someone to talk to about it. And it might be a friend, it might be your partner, it might be a counsellor. It might be something that you're uncomfortable with talking to, your normal circle of friends or family about. It might relate to one of those people.
Mm.
So find someone to talk to about it.
Mm.
And often, and 9 times out of 10, they're not going to tell you what to do. It's not about the being told what to do. It's just about getting it out.
Mm.
And once you get it out, and I'm not something I've ever done, but I understand people write journal things and they write diary entries. I think it's about writing things down or speaking things. Then you can put some context around it and use that to then help understand it better. So,
Yeah, and what do you think? Yeah, for the listener, what is the best thing that you can do as someone listening to someone, opening up about the struggles? Because I've heard, like you don't want to give them advice or, tell them what to do. Like what's the ideal situation for a listener?
I guess the ideal situation, it goes right back to what we were talking about at the start about that humble leader and about listening. You might read something or, look it up, active listening. So what's the important thing is that person listens, is that person doesn't try. So if you're talking to me, is that I don't then try and go, oh yeah, I know about that because it happened to me and I did this. Yeah, no, that's not what we're doing here, mate. It's like you've got to listen and understand and empathize and try and see what's behind that person. Where are they coming from with this? Why are they telling me? And do they just want to be heard? Are they actually asking for an answer? Very, very rarely are they asking for an answer. And I'm quite happy to throw in a gender stereotype here. A guy, and I can only speak for myself because I am one, will often want to fix things. Will think, oh, I can fix that. Oh, here's a problem. I can fix that. I'm sure you take something, to your dad, or I've got a problem. I'm not suggesting him, but he might go, oh, well, I can fix that. It's almost like a reflex is to go, oh, well, you're having trouble in the workplace. Well, you need to do A, B, C, D, and, this is the outcome. Yeah, no. That's what I used to think, when I was kind of younger and more stupid. And now I get it. That's not actually it. Just shut up, Craig, and listen. And listen and think about how that person is feeling and what they're feeling. That's more important than coming up with a solution. So I think you just want to be heard. And sometimes you may not agree with what that person is saying. You might think they've completely got the wrong end of an argument. That's okay. You don't have to blindly agree with people as well. I mean, if someone's coming to you with some whacked out conspiracy theory, you don't have to go, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure the earth is flat and it's all a conspiracy. No. You can respectfully go, well, look, I think that, I don't think the earth is flat. And maybe here's some resources that you might want to use to follow that up, or I don't think this struggle you're having in your workplace, it may not, I'm not going to try and minimize it. I'm not going to say it's not as bad as it, because it feels really awful to you, right? So I'm listening to you and it's a really awful thing. But there may be some other things you could consider doing this. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but maybe you could consider doing this. But mainly it's about the listening. Some people might want to tell you things just because they want you to agree with them. And yeah, maybe that's not always so helpful for anyone. But if someone's really got a problem and they're telling you, they just want someone to hear.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. Yeah, no, I think I've learned a lot today. It was amazing speaking to you. I appreciate you coming on today.
Okay, no worries. Good to see you. Cheers, mate.
Good to see you. See ya.
Bye. Do I leave now?